I'd like to thank Creative Mornings for inviting me for this talk. And the motivation was the Current Conservation is a magazine that tries to bring art and science together. And I want to take us through a journey of how I arrived at this juncture and some of the sort of art meets science adventures that I've been on through sort of my 20 years of experience in ecology. I'm going to start with a turtle story. One of the reasons that I got inspired to work on turtles was there was a guy that of whom was said by Janaki Lennon and Rom Whittaker. Rom's a recently minted Padma Shri that you might have read about, India's Snake Man. And many stories of people that work on sea turtles in India start with hanging around Snake Bunking College usually, and many of these people would still, when I talked to them, they would say they were hanging around, and Ram would walk up to them and say, "Hey man, do you want to clean a snake pit?" And 30 years later, they were ecologists or herpetologists or photographers or whatever. Satish did some amazing things, which we, as college students, we heard about. In the 1970s, he went out to an uninhabited island in Lakshadweep and spent 5 months there by himself. This island is 6 hours from the nearest inhabited island in the Lakshadweep, and he was there for 5.5 months all by himself on a little island that he could walk around. Seen here with that's Satish Bhaskar in the middle and Ram to his left. On one occasion, when he was doing sea turtle surveys in West Papua in Indonesia, he was single-handedly tagging hundreds of leatherbacks. He used to swim out to a boat to give mail. But interestingly, when people went to visit, the local people had come up with the story that this strange guy came from a foreign country and tagged these turtles with little metal tags, and at the end of it, went back to his country and used a giant magnet and attracted all these turtles back to his country, and that's why all the turtles had the numbers had gone down. Now, while all of this was going on, we were college students, and there were since the 70s, Ram, Whittaker, and Satish and others had started these turtle walks on the Chennai coast. And as students, we felt that we wanted to do something to save turtles, and so we set up. There had been hatcheries that the forest department had maintained, but we set up a students group in 1989 and started helping with the conservation of sea turtles, and that's how I kind of got involved with sea turtle biology and conservation. 40 years later, that group still exists, but to come back to sea turtles themselves, over the next 20 years that I worked on sea turtles, I discovered many amazing things about them. Very quickly, there are 7 species of sea turtle worldwide. The largest is a leatherback turtle, grows up to 6 or 7 feet in length and can weigh up to 600 or 700 kilograms. Hawksbill turtles, green turtles, and olive ridleys that I'll talk about a little bit more in a bit. These are the 4 species that we find in India. What's amazing, what I found truly amazing as I started to get to know more and more about them are these incredible life cycles that they have. They migrate thousands of kilometers from their breeding to their feeding grounds, and then mate in offshore waters, lay a few clutches of eggs, which are 100 to 150 in each nest. When they incubate, the sex of the hatchlings is determined by temperature. So unlike mammals and humans and most other animals, they don't have sex chromosomes. The temperature of the nest determines whether they become males or females. The hatchlings, when they emerge, they find the sea using light. And so if there's a lot of light on the beach, they get disoriented, and many of them don't find their way to the sea. And then they use the Earth's magnetic field to navigate. So there's really some very, very fascinating things about their biology with regards to how they orient, how they navigate, how they find their way around the world, and so on. Some of the work that we ourselves did, some of the work that I've been involved in, involved tracking some of these turtles. So we tracked leatherbacks from the Andaman Islands, and we found that they can swim as far east as Western Australia and as far west as Mozambique and Madagascar. So it's pretty much across the entire Indian Ocean. We also work, and my colleague Murali is here, we've been working on the mass nesting populations of olive ridleys in Orissa. Olive ridleys do this amazing thing. Once a year, during the season, thousands of them will come out to nest. This is an occasion on which I think on a single night we counted 60,000 turtles. And so during one nesting event, you might have 150, 200, 250,000 turtles nesting within a span of a few days. So this is again a bird's eye view of the 2015 Aribada taken with a drone. Those are actually adult turtles on the beach. We also tracked turtles, and we found that olive ridleys on the coast of Orissa swim across the Bay of Bengal. Many of them feed off the coast of Sri Lanka. Now, in the early 2000s, at some point, so all of this is leading up to something, right? So in the early 2000s, I'm doing all of this work on sea turtles, and I give a talk that sounds somewhat similar to this. And one of the people that was in the audience that was associated with Pratham Books comes up to me and says, that sounds really fascinating. Children would love it. You should do a children's story. And I'm like, what? I mean, what does it, how does one write a children's story about turtles? But sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing, that apart from these beautiful things about the biology, over the last 30, 40 years, sea turtles like tigers and elephants and other species have also faced a lot of threats. So they used to be caught in fishing nets and shipped to Calcutta for meat. And a young lady called Vijaya was spearheaded a conservation movement in the 80s. I mention her because she will reappear later in the story. But in the last 20 years, a lot of turtles have also died in trawl nets. Given all of this background, Turtle Story was born, and I would call it my first foray into the worlds of into attempting to bring art and science together. Turtle Story honestly was kind of a fairly linear story. A little hatchling starts out, goes out into the ocean, escapes all of these predatory fishes, meets all of these other species of turtles, meets Mr. Leatherback, and eventually, of course, has to migrate back to her breeding ground when she becomes an adult. She faces many dangers, such as trawl nets and giant sharks and so on. Anyway, she finds her way back, she lays nests, and her hatchlings come out, and the hatchlings go out into the sea. And it was a very sort of linear story. And of course, Maya Ramaswamy, who did the illustrations, did a fabulous job. And so the book looks beautiful, and there's some copies that you can look at. But you get sucked into these things. So when I had done one and it came out and everybody said, it looks so pretty, and then, I'm like, oh, cool, that sounds nice. I mean, I'm quite happy to receive the praise for it. It's like, lovely book, isn't it? Yes, illustrations are lovely. I worked so hard, but it just seemed like a cool thing to do. So I started thinking about, another one. And during the course of my own sort of doctoral work, I'd come across these tree frogs, which eventually a student of mine did his PhD on. Tree frogs are beautiful. They're found in the Western Ghats, this particular genus of tree frogs, and you get dozens of really, really beautiful species. So was born this somewhat fantastic tale of the adventures of Philotus Frog, who, like his somewhat namesake, makes an attempt to go around the world. So he's heard about this big sea somewhere. He's never been down from a tree, and so he sets off to find the sea. And what happens in this story really, which I think happens somewhat organically, is while sort of painting the picture, so to speak, he comes across a lot of really interesting friends. He comes across hornbills and frogmouths and lion-tailed macaques, black and orange flycatchers. This particular species of frog that was discovered about 10 years ago, it's about 100 million years old, and it's the only frog belonging to this family that's found in the world, actually. And it was this amazing discovery. Lives underground and only comes out during the monsoon. So I've accidentally discovered that this was Tavale going out was an interesting way to talk to people, children or otherwise, about all of these interesting animals that they don't otherwise, typically encounter. So it's like most of the time people are only reading about, tigers and lions and elephants and so on. After I finished writing this book, a colleague told me, he said, he's also an evolutionary biologist. He said, I have one, I liked your book, but I have one fault to find. This person works on a bird called shortwings, which are also endemic to the Western Ghats, and they're also really have been there for millions of years. And he said, I had written somewhere in the book that Tavale's friend, the warbler, had flown down from far and told him about something. And he said, no, it's the shortwing that's really his friend. And I thought about it, and I said, yes, that's quite true, and therefore there needs to be a sequel. as you can see in this sort of in my train of thought, that is getting closer and closer in some sense to the science that we actually do. So when I'm thinking about the sequel, I'm thinking about the research that we do. And while we were doing a book event for the Adventures of Phil Otter's Frog, my student Vijay, who's done his PhD on turtles, comes and talks about his thesis, which is about going across the entire Western Ghats to each of those mountain chains that you see over there, and sampling each of them for these bush frogs and collecting hundreds of specimens, samples, and doing this complex phylogenetic analysis, which I'm not going to sort of like go into very much, but just to say that we found these different evolutionary groups in the northern and southern Ghats, lots of canopy frogs in the southern Western Ghats, very few of them in the north, many grassland frogs in the north, and all of this, and leading to these evolutionary theories about how frog species form. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I'm thinking about how do I now tell this story through Tavle's eyes. But we'll have to wait for that. There are so Tavle's future adventures involve another journey across the Western Ghats, but this really is to tell the story of the evolution of frogs in the Western Ghats. Not yet out, but that's what I'm currently working on. That's what we're working on now. The last story, the frog part of the story, is another sort of longer children's novel that came out last year through Penguin, and the story starts with a slender Laurie the loris seeing an animal that she can't identify, a mysterious animal in the Western Ghats that looks like a cat, but nobody knows what it is. Have you seen lorises in Bangalore? Any of you? Well, there are lorises in Bangalore. They're there on the IISc campus and other places where there's enough sort of vegetation, so you can actually see these in Bangalore. Now, the story, of course, starts with Laurie the loris and racket-tailed drongo. But the premise of this friendship is the idea of mixed species foraging flocks. Now, mixed species foraging flocks are multiple species of birds that come together and feed on insects together. And there's a lot of ecological research about why they do this. Do they do this because they get foraging benefits? Are they able to find insects better because they're foraging together? Or does it afford them protection from predators? So the large sort of body of scientific and ecological research on mixed species foraging groups is why do they form? Is it for anti-predatory benefits or is it for foraging benefits? And my research group has been working on mixed groups in birds, mixed feeding groups in reef fish, and so on. The third character in the story is an owl who of course, is potentially a predator of these animals, but ends up being part of this group. Now, where did that, where did that come from? When Meera and I were in Great Nicobar and I was studying leatherback turtles, some of the pictures which you saw, she was doing a project on the Nicobar tree shrew, which is a tiny little, a tiny mammal. And what we found was, of course, that these drongos were following them around and feeding on the insects that the tree shrew would flush out of the, flush from the bark. And this was expected. Drongos tend to do that. But we also found the sparrowhawk, which we thought would be attempting to attack them, also feeding with this. So this predator was actually also, instead of attempting to attack these other animals, was actually had come to the conclusion that the maximum benefit for him was to hang around and also feed on flushed prey. Geckos and so on. And so as the trio of Laurie and Drongo and Mr. Owl is sort of in some sense was born from this real sort of group that we saw out in one of our studies. Other interesting things, Laurie encounters other interesting animals. For example, there's the leopard Sirte, who is an angry, grumpy leopard because he wandered into a village, got trapped by people, and got relocated far away. We have colleagues whose research has shown that when you translocate leopards, they tend to get obviously like people would as well, completely disoriented, and that's when they actually become far more dangerous. She also found that some of the leopards that they then subsequently tracked to figure out where they were going would walk right back to where, hundreds of kilometers back to where they were originally trapped. So there's a beautiful track that you can find on the internet. My colleague's name is Vidya Atreya, and she's been studying these leopards. They caught it in Sanjay Gandhi National Park in Bombay, released it, I think it's about 500 or 600 kilometers away, across the Ghats. And the track is like a road. The leopard goes west to the Western Ghats, turns right, and walks straight up right back to Borivali. As I said, I'd come back to Vijaya. Vijaya, amongst the many cool things that she did during her short life, was that she went down to Kerala to track down this turtle that hadn't been seen for over 100 years, or 89 years or something. And she found it, and Viji, the turtle, makes an appearance in the book, but the turtle itself, the real forest cane turtle, was renamed after Vijaya, so it's now called Vijaya Kelis. So all of that and more, the many sort of adventures that Laurie has and gets past with help from her friends. I guess the largest sort of picture I'm telling over here is that there's a world of science, and as I said to a group a few months ago, humans have been communicating through art for as long as human history exists, right? Even cavemen knew that the best way to communicate was through art. Somewhere along the way, scientists basically lost that ability, or forgot about it, or didn't get the memo. So scientists spend most of their life communicating to a small community of a few thousand people, write papers that at the most 8 other people will read, and think that they've been wildly successful. We had a science communication panel at a conference recently, and I was sharing 3 of my publications. One of my most cited papers, which has been cited like 100 times, a popular non-fiction book that's probably sold about 1,000 copies, and Philotus Frog, which has sold about 15,000 copies across 10 languages, right? And one asks oneself, which is doing the best job of getting across to people. In parallel, about 10 years ago, we started a magazine that really was intended to communicate science to a wider audience. And Current Conservation started out with short, succinct summaries of scientific papers, but then since then we've expanded out to a range of different article types, including a section for children. So now we have short stories, poetry, essays, and a whole bunch of different kinds of features. And about 6 years ago, I had for a couple of years I had a guest editor who actually came. We started out mostly with photographs and images and articles. Who said, why aren't we using more other visual mediums to communicate science? This has now grown. We're doing a variety of different kinds of illustrations. We're now in the process of thinking of not just editorial illustrations, but a range of different illustration types as well to communicate science. One of the sections that we're starting this year is summaries of research papers as cartoons, and well-known science comic illustrator Rohan Chakravarti is going to be doing that series for us. So a bunch of different exciting things around the idea of bringing art and science together. In closing, I think it's people ask me. So I've told today's story in a somewhat linear fashion. When these books have come out, people have said, do you write them to communicate science? And the answer is no, I don't write them to communicate science. I write them because they're fun to write and they look beautiful when people illustrate them. And I think the larger goal of Current Conservation is we don't want people to be writing. People are writing for us today because they want to tell a story about their science. But eventually we want this to be a platform where people are writing for the pleasure of writing and for the pleasure of having their work illustrated and look beautiful, and the illustrators are working because they're able to tell stories about the world because they're sort of engaging with the scientists. So what we really like, I guess what I'm saying is that we'd like to create a community where people are creating these products for a larger, wider public audience for the for the pleasure it gives them. In the same manner that I've sort of tripped and stumbled and found my way into this addiction for writing children's stories that I don't seem to be able to give up.